It's May 23rd of the 1999 ICC World Cup, and the Aussies, they're in trouble. Big trouble. There's only 2 wickets left, and they need 13 runs off this last over to win the match. But at the other end is the last person you'd want to face in English conditions. The left arm master of swing himself, Wasim Akram. Damien Martyn needed to get something on the ball and start the over off well, but that didn't happen. The second ball is a full toss, edged away for an easy 2. This third ball wouldn't be so loose. An absolute peach, and Australia need 11 off 3. Only Fleming and McGrath are left for the Aussies. They need 2 boundaries at least off these final 3 deliveries. But against this bowler though, good luck. Australia need 11 off 2. It's possible, but Wasim, he wants to finish this now. Pakistan win by 10 runs, and as the crowd invade the pitch, the outcome Australia were hoping to avoid becomes reality. With 2 losses in their first 3 games, Australia stood on the brink of elimination from the World Cup in only the group stage. But if you think that this Australia team would go out with a whimper, you'd be mistaken. In fact, what this team would do for the rest of this World Cup would come to define the next decade of international ODI cricket. The 1999 World Cup was one of the most competitive of all time. Pakistan, the team we just saw, was one of the big contenders. South Africa too came with one of their strongest ever sides. Even defending champion Sri Lanka was still in the background, but the one who stood out arguably more than anyone else was Australia. Their best 11 might have been the strongest in the tournament. The power and elegance of Gilchrist and Waugh, the bowling of Warne and McGrath, and a middle order that included Ricky Ponting, Steve Waugh, and the king of the ODI run chase, Michael Bevan. But their preparation leading to the World Cup had been far from ideal. Before the World Cup, they travelled to the West Indies for a grueling series of 4 tests and 7 one-dayers. They drew both series, but not before the crowd stopped proceedings in 2 separate one-dayers. In the 5th ODI, as the 49th over was completed, the crowd invaded the pitch, perhaps thinking that the match was over. Some even took off with 1 or 2 wickets as souvenirs. After officials returned things to normal, Australia eventually needed 4 off the last ball to win. They ran 2 and were coming back for the 3rd to level the scores, but not before spectators yet again came onto the ground and stopped the game before it ended.
Absolute chaos. Someone's going to get injured out there.
The umpires had no choice but to call a tie. And what's crazy is, the second incident of this series might have been even more controversial. In the final ODI of this series in Bridgetown, Barbados, Barbadian local Sherwin Campbell was given out after a contentious run-out call where he collided with all-rounder Brendon. This was the game's second contentious run-out call, as Michael Bevan was given out in similar fashion earlier. The crowd started throwing projectiles onto the field, chanting for their local batter to come back out, with one bottle narrowly missing Steve Waugh's head. The game was paused for 45 minutes, in which time Australia withdrew their appeal and Campbell came back out. The Aussies eventually lost the match by 8 wickets. Bottles being thrown from the crowd weren't the only things that Steve Waugh had to worry about coming into this World Cup. He didn't have the greatest ODI series himself, scoring a total of 135 runs in 7 matches, more than half of which was scored in a 72 not out in the one game. As the captain of his national team, Steve Waugh was well aware of the fact that Australia had gone back-to-back World Cups without winning it. Some countries might accept this history as water under the bridge and move on. But for Australia, their administrators held them up to a higher standard. They expected Australia to win it all. And this was made crystal clear when national selector Trevor Hons said to Steve, if the results didn't meet expectations, a change at the top of the one-day team might occur. Steve took this to mean that if they didn't qualify at least for the semis, his captaincy might be under threat. And if they didn't make it out of the group phase, he might be out of the side altogether. All of this made the loss to Pakistan at Headingley all the more serious. Here Australia was on the verge, not only of being eliminated in the group phase, but for some of the players, the captain included, they could perhaps lose their spot in the side altogether. To avoid this, a blunt equation was laid bare before them. In order for them to meet the expectations of the selectors and the majority of the Australian public, they could not lose any more games. In other words, from here on out, they needed one thing to win the World Cup: perfection. Australia's journey towards seeking perfection started against Bangladesh at Chester Street. But before they made it onto the field, they made a few changes, dropping Damien Martyn and Paul Rifle for all-rounders Tom Moody and Brendon. On first glance, this gave Australia more pace options to bowl with. but it also paved the way for Glenn McGrath to open the bowling once again. After picking up an ankle injury in the West Indies, the Aussies were experimenting with him bowling at first change, and their poor performances had shown it wasn't going very well. Electing to bowl first, Steve Waugh gave the new ball to him, and he wasted no time getting Khalid Mahmood pinned in front for 6. McGrath's tight line and length would be an indicator for the rest of Australia's bowling. Bangladesh just struggled to get Australia away. Only 2 batters got past 20 runs, in an innings dotted with regular wickets throughout. They still managed to bat the 50 overs, but only for a score of 178. Australia had a vested interest in making sure this run chase was a short one because they needed to improve their net run rate, which might become an important factor later on. And they got an early life with Mark Waugh being dropped at point. After that, both he and Adam Gilchrist got off to a flyer, combining for a 98 runs off the first 11 overs. A short hiccup occurred when 3 wickets fell in quick succession, before Tom Moody and Ricky Ponting brought the game home in under 20 overs.
I think that one may have gone all the way. That's the end of proceedings.
With their second victory of the World Cup, Australia were back on track, with 1 match to go in the group stage against a familiar foe, the West Indies. Both teams needed a win to progress to the Super Sixes. However, any West Indian fan hoping for a close contest like earlier in the Caribbean was soon to be disappointed. The old Glenn McGrath was back, the one with metronomic line and length and pinpoint accuracy. And this was the match that he proved it, picking up 5 wickets for 14 runs off 9.4 overs, including this worldie to get Brian Lara, pitching on leg and nipping the top of off. He ripped through the heart of the batting lineup, and opener Ridley Jacobs could only watch as his partners were falling all around him. With a little help from Shane Warne and others, McGrath and Australia bowled out the West Indies for 110. Even though the required run rate was only 2.7 and over, Australia needed a quick run chase yet again to help with their net run rate. Standing in their way was Curtly Ambrose and Courtney Walsh. Both bowlers pinned down Australia's openers. Curtly gets Mark Waugh out for 3 and bowls Gilchrist for 21. Lehman is his 3rd victim off 9 balls. But the Windies' good start couldn't last forever though. There just wasn't enough runs to defend. Although that's when things got a bit weird. See, Australia could reach the total of 111 runs comfortably, but they had an eye on the next phase. They worked out that if they made the run chase take longer than it should, there might be a chance that they could help the West Indies to qualify for the next phase on net run rate, and in doing so, knock out New Zealand in the process. It made for some slow, if not boring, final few overs, not to mention a few sideways glances from their friends across the ditch. And I know that some people might think this is unsporting, and it probably is. But if you had the chance to knock out a rival team who beat you earlier in the World Cup and replace them with another who you just bowled out for 110, I'm guessing the thought would at least cross your mind. It's an indication of a ruthless streak that was starting to show itself within the Australian team, always thinking of the next game and how to put themselves in the best possible position to win the World Cup, even if, in this case, it didn't work, because a no-ball bouncer would win the game for Australia by 6 wickets, and in the process qualify them for the Super Sixes. Their first hurdle had just been overcome. Along with them in the next phase, from Group B would be Pakistan and New Zealand, while from Group A, South Africa, India and Zimbabwe qualified. And this was when things really started to get interesting.
On he's gone. Robin Singh gets the double strike.
In the Super Sixes round, all teams would be together. As Australia had already played Pakistan and New Zealand, they would only have to play India, Zimbabwe and South Africa in this phase. At the end of it all, the top 4 would make the semis. Australia and India would kick off the Super Sixes against each other at the Oval in London. Winning the toss and bowling first, the Indians showed that at least early on, batting might be a bit tricky. Mark Waugh and Gilchrist had to dig in to stay together. But as the sun bore down on the wicket, batting started to get easier, and the two could free their arms. For all their hard work and close calls, India were finding it hard to get a breakthrough, until their 5th bowler, Sourav Ganguly, gets Gilchrist for 31. Mark Waugh, now with Ricky Ponting, powered on. He and Australia look set for a big score with some beautiful shots. And at the 30 over mark, Australia were 1 for 157, with Waugh 17 short of a century. By the end of the next over though, both were back in the sheds, having been snared by the military mediums of Robin Singh. Through tight bowling and regular wickets in the second half of the innings, India restricted Australia to 243 with 3 overs to go. It was thanks to some great late hitting from Michael Bevan and Tom Moody to bring the score to 282 after 50.
Superb stroke, gave himself some room, whipped it over mid-wicket, superbly timed.
With India beginning to chase down 283 runs, the most important contest of the day was about to start, McGrath versus Tendulkar. A hush fell over the crowd. An early victory here, for either side, might set the tone for the rest of the run chase. As McGrath delivered the first ball, neither gave anything away. Tight bowling was met with a watchful defence. McGrath comes back again, but this time a little wider and beats the edge. He's got one ball left and he comes back with this.
Australia. That's out, that's caught behind, he's got him, Glenn McGrath has struck, that's the end of Tendulkar.
A textbook Glenn McGrath wicket, pinpoint accuracy with a hint of seam movement, tempting Sachin to come forward and nick one that he might have been able to leave alone. Australia with a massive early breakthrough. McGrath wasn't finished though. If he can get Tendulkar out with this bowling, he could get Dravid out too. Fleming would get in on the act, forcing Ganguly to chop on for 8 runs. India were 3 for 12 early. 3 overs later, McGrath had his third, getting Azharuddin for 3. But as Ajay Jadeja and Robin Singh met in the middle, it signalled the start of a spirited rally. The bowling and the demons in the pitch were still around, but they hung in there and attacked where they could. A 50-run partnership would become a 100-run partnership as they began to frustrate the Aussies. Even Shane Warne would start to cop some punishment, going for 21 runs off 1 over. However, this attack could only last so long. As Tom Moody got Robin Singh out for 75, it was a flash of entertainment before Australia brought everyone back down to earth. Michael Bevan would soon run Mongia out, followed by the dismissals of Srinath and Kumble. In the end, the result became a foregone conclusion. India were bowled out for 205 and Australia won by 77 runs. And their march towards the finals continued.
So that's it. They're gone, India all out for 205.
Zimbabwe would be Australia's next opponents. They'd been the surprise packets of the World Cup so far, beating India and South Africa in the group stages. They were also on top of the Super Sixes as this game began. Australia set a total of 303 runs, underpinned by a 129 run stand between the War brothers. It was here where Mark became the first player in World Cup history to score 4 centuries in his career up to that point. Zimbabwe's run chase got off to a flyer. There was a point where they were 1 for 153 off 28 overs. But once Murray Goodwin got out, the next 5 fell for only 47 runs. In an effort to preserve their net run rate, the Zimbabweans decided to see the rest of their overs out, instead of going for the win and risk being bowled out altogether. This eventually meant that they lost the match by 44 runs. Of all the Zimbabweans that day, you have to feel a bit of sympathy for opening all-rounder Neil Johnson. He scored his highest ever ODI score, 132 off 144, with 14 fours and 2 sixes. For one final day, Zimbabwe would stay on top of the Super 6 table, and Australia had won their 3rd game, even under slightly unusual circumstances. If Australia's last match seemed a bit of a let-off, their next match wouldn't be so easy. In fact, their next opponents were arguably Australia's most competitive rival at the time, the mighty South Africa. Earlier we said that South Africa had brought to the World Cup one of their strongest ever sides, but I don't think that I did them justice in showing just how strong they really were. If we go through South Africa's records and pick out their top 20 highest all-time ODI run scorers, this side had 9 of them, including Jacques Kallis, who is number 8 highest all-time ODI run scorer in the world. Looking at their bowling too, South Africa's top 3 highest all-time ODI wicket takers were all in this side. These facts in their own right are amazing, but there was an X factor to this team that kept oppositions awake at night, and his name was Lance Klusener. There were 2 sides to all-rounder Lance Klusener's game. First was Klusener the bowler, often given the ball in the middle and death overs, who was very good at keeping run rates low, mainly because he was hard to get away, with his mixture of accuracy, cutters and slower balls. But the other, more scary side was when Lance Klusener slotted into South Africa's finisher position. The batter brought on at the end of an innings to add a final flurry of runs to a total or chase a score down at the death, similar to a Michael Bevan for Australia. But that's where any comparison between these two ends. Bevan was like a scalpel. He precisely did exactly what was necessary to win the match. Nothing more, nothing less. But Klusener, he was a sledgehammer. No bowling attack, run total, or stadium window was safe when big hitting Lance Klusener was in form. And the problem for South Africa's opponents was that he was having the World Cup of a lifetime. These are Klusener's scores in the World Cup so far, to which South Africa had won all but one. There are 2 almost 4 half centuries And for that game versus India, he was at the crease when they won. Remember, he came in at 7, sometimes even 8. And it's figures like these that show why he was so feared, and the magnitude of the challenge that South Africa posed to Australia in this competition. This hotly anticipated clash was at Headingley. A tight opening few overs gave way to South Africa's first boundary in the 6th. Australia wasn't bowling too bad, but slowly the Proteas were increasing the run rate, mainly by way of 4s like this. Paul Rifle would get Kirsten out, which brought in Daryl Cullinan, and together with Herschel Gibbs, the two pushed their score into the hundreds. Going at 4 runs and over, a partnership here could have set South Africa up for a big total if they stayed together. But at 1 for 137, Warney gets Cullinan, and then Cronje within 4 balls. Gibbs responded by accelerating all the way to his second ODI century, eventually getting out for 101. South Africa were 4 for 219 with around 5 overs left. That's not much time to increase your score. Well, unless, of course, you have a certain sledgehammer to come out next. Klusener's first victim was a drag down from Michael Bevan, which probably should have went for 6. Then McGrath here, and here. It wasn't just the hitting that was good about these final few overs, but the urgent running between him and Jonty Rhodes. Although Rhodes, Klusener and Pollock all get out in the final 3 overs, South Africa pushed their score to 271 over 50 overs. It's game on. Australia's off to a bad start. Gilchrist is bowled for 5 and a mix-up gets Mark Waugh run out. Then Martin is dismissed too, but Ricky Ponting doesn't let this stop him. He comes in and attacks from the off. With Steve Waugh now at the crease, Australia's current and future ODI captains partner up to turn the tide of the game. From being 3 for 48 off 11, they were now 3 for 120 in the 26th. Both batters looked set and looked like they could bring the game home themselves. But just around the corner, something happened that would live in Cricket World Cup folklore forever. In the 31st over, Herschel Gibbs catches a chip shot from Steve Waugh and in his excitement to throw it up in the air, loses control of the ball. He's just dropped the Australian captain. This was the turning point of the game. Ponting would get out for 69 a couple of overs later, but Steve Waugh had been given a second life and that's all he needed. Bringing up his century shortly afterwards before taking Australia home with the help of Bevan and Moody. He finished with a match-winning innings of 120 runs as the Aussies beat South Africa by 5 wickets. Looking back at this now, you can see that this is one of Steve Waugh's most defining innings as an ODI captain. Sure, he got a second chance, but he put the team on his back and carried them over the line. And in the process, the team had met the minimum expectations of their selectors and qualified for the semi-finals. They were only 2 wins away from taking the World Cup back home. But first, they had to face this same South Africa team once again in the semis, in what is arguably the greatest ODI ever played. 4 days since their last encounter, Australia and South Africa would go to battle once again, this time at Edgbaston, for a place in the 1999 World Cup final. Australia was sent into bat, and again, just like their last innings, they got off to a bad start, with Mark Waugh caught behind off Pollock for a duck. But for the next 10 overs, it would be Gilchrist and Ponting that would get the Aussies going, in what would be the first of many back and forth moments in this game. The two combined for a 50-run partnership before Donald would get Ponting to guide one to cover. 1 became 3 as Lehman is then dismissed for 1, and Gilchrist is out 2 overs later.
In the air, third man's under it. He's got him straight down his throat. That's a big wicket.
Australia is sliding. Their captain, fresh off his best knock of the tournament, comes to the crease and alongside Michael Bevan consolidates the innings. South Africa are relentless with their pressure, but these two manage to absorb it, putting away any bad balls and pushing onwards. From 4 for 68 in the 17th to 4 for 147 in the 38, Steve Waugh brings up his half century off 73 balls. Shaun Pollock would have the last laugh though, getting Waugh out on 56, followed by Moody in the same over. But with 10 overs to go at 6 for 158, we then entered Michael Bevan's domain. Batting with the tail like he'd done so many occasions before, his job was to somehow get Australia as many runs as possible with his toolkit of hard running, nifty glances and the punishment of bad balls. Although the tail would quickly collapse once Shane Warne was out, Bevan had gotten Australia to 213 all out. Shaun Pollock finished with 5 for 36 and Alan Donald finished with 4 for 32 in a great all-round South African performance. The question was though, could they back it up with the bat? The answer, at least early on, was a resounding yes, needing only 4 runs and over from ball 1, The first 10 overs were all South Africa's. Even with the new ball, Australia's pace attack couldn't find a wicket, and things were starting to become ominous. If these two stayed in, 213 runs just didn't seem like enough. But through the game, the pitch had shown a bit of seam movement, and as the old saying goes, if it seams, it'll spin. Steve Waugh throws the ball to Shane Warne, and well, just watch.
Oh, beautiful ball. That's a wonderful delivery from Shane Warne.
7 years and 2 weeks to the day since he delivered the ball of the century, Shane Warne produces another to bowl Herschel Gibbs. But he wasn't finished, getting Kirsten and Cronje shortly afterwards. Warney had swung the game back into Australia's favour. Cullinan was then next to go, getting run out by Michael Bevan. South Africa were 4 for 61 in the blink of an eye. The Proteas were under pressure, and the running between the wickets was showing that they were feeling it. Despite that, for the next 18 overs and a few close calls, Jacques Kallis and Jonty Rhodes hung in there. Remember, the target was only 214. They still had a chance, as they brought them to 4 for 144. However, with 10 overs left in the match, another twist in the tale would occur, with Bevan catching Jonty Rhodes in the deep. Pollock came to the crease and the pressure was right back on South Africa. With the ball and in the field, South Africa were getting slowly smothered by Australia, until Pollock was given a life here. He made the most of it, getting back at Warney with a 6 and 4 in successive balls. Warney, though, had 2 balls left in his innings and one had Jacques Kallis's name on it. He was out for 53. Okay, I gotta take a breath. South Africa was 6 for 175, needing 38 off 31 balls. Warney had almost finished his 10 overs, but the Aussies still had Damien Fleming and Glenn McGrath to bowl at the death. They needed 3 wickets to get into the final as the next batter came to the crease. Lance Klusener. For all the pressure that South Africa was under, with one shot, Klusener looked like he had ice in his veins, getting 5 off his first 2 balls. But things at the other end wouldn't be so calm. Throughout the rest of the innings, Klusener tried to will his team over the line, urging his partner to run or simply slapping the ball to the boundary. No one was hanging around with him though. Boucher was next as McGrath sent his middle peg flying.
Bowled him! Knocked him over middle stump. A dot ball on the wicket. It's 8 for 196.
The game was now so close that South Africa needed one thing, to give Klusener the strike. If they did that, he'll hit his way to victory. But the type of pressure that was on the tail at this point was unlike any that most of us would ever feel in our life. This happened 2 balls later. South Africa were down to their final wicket, 16 needed off 8. Klusener and Alan Donald were at the crease and Klusener had the strike.
Full pitch, down a rifle, he should catch this, should he? No, he drops it and it probably goes for 4 or 6.
Wow, everyone's feeling the pressure. Not only was Klusener just dropped, but Rifle had inadvertently parried the ball over the boundary for 6. 10 off 7 is needed, and Klusener gets a single to retain the strike in the last over. Okay, here we go. The final over. 9 is needed off 6 balls. 4 off the first ball. 5 off 5. It's at this point that it looks like Lance asks the umpire a very important question. Is the tie enough for South Africa to advance? It wasn't. South Africa needed to win outright because Australia had the better net run rate. Here comes the next ball. Another 4. 1 needed off 4. Australia's World Cup hopes were hanging by a thread. Even less than a thread. They need a wicket before South Africa score again. They almost get at the next ball. Donald comes out of his crease, pleading for a single, not knowing where the ball went or how close Australia were to hitting his stumps. There's now 3 balls to go. 3 balls for South Africa to end Australia's quest for perfection. But it didn't last that long. This next delivery was the final ball of the game, and the one that is seared into the memories of cricket fans globally from that day onwards.
There it is. They go for this will be out, surely. Oh, it's out. It's going to be run out. Oh, that's it. South Africa out. Donald didn't run.
It's a tie. Lance Klusener pushes the ball back past the bowler, but Alan Donald didn't run. A single was there, but maybe because of what happened the ball before, he was more cautious. I guess we'll never know. South Africa had been knocked out of the 1999 World Cup in the most brutal way, through a run-out that was 100% self-inflicted. They'd lost to their arch-rivals twice in a row. But what an amazing game. It's my opinion that Australia's victory against South Africa in the semis had done more than just give them a spot in the final. South Africa had taken Australia right to the edge in the most high pressure of situations. To beat them, Australia had to push their own standard of cricket perhaps further than this 11 had ever gone. When they came out the other end victorious, Australia were a different team. They now knew not only what it took to win in moments like these, but that they can thrive in that kind of environment. And when the time is necessary, they can pull their opponents into those deep waters too. In their final hurdle to perfection, to avenge back-to-back World Cup defeats, there was one team that stood in their way. The team that helped put Australia in this spot in the first place, Pakistan. The home of cricket, Lord's Cricket Ground would hold the 1999 World Cup final between Pakistan and Australia. Pakistan fans from far and wide came to watch this final, even if it meant climbing up a construction site next door to watch it. And when it got underway, it was Pakistan who won the toss and batted first. From here, I would love to say that Pakistan took the game to the Aussies. That on the back of someone like Saeed Anwar, who scored back-to-back centuries on his way to the final, they put up a big total for Australia to chase. But unfortunately, the reality was much different. The first wicket to fall was Wajahat Talawasti, caught with this blinder at second slip. 3 balls later, Saeed Anwar was out chopping on. McGrath wasn't giving an inch. His next 3 overs, he only conceded 1 run. But for just a moment, he would give them a life in the field. 3 overs later, Steve Waugh wouldn't let them off the hook so easily. And at the 21 over mark, Pakistan were 3 for 69. Then came Shane Warne, fresh off taking 4 wickets in the semi. His next 10 overs in this game would show why he was called the king of spin, dismissing Ahmed, Khan, Afridi and Akram. By the time Wasim fell for 8, Pakistan were 9 for 129, eventually bowled out for 132. Warne finished with 4 for 33 off 9, making him the joint highest wicket taker for that tournament. Pakistan just didn't show their best on that day, and to cap it all off, the scorecard showed a very disappointing stat. The highest scorer for Pakistan in that innings was Australia, with 25 extras. They say that adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. I think in the case of this Australia team, that is very fitting. From the rocky tour of the West Indies, to the ultimatum set by their own selectors, or the bad World Cup start, to the back-to-back thrillers against South Africa, all of these things brought out the qualities of this side. Sure, if Herschel Gibbs didn't drop Steve Waugh in the Super Sixes, or South Africa got that final run in the semis, this whole story changes. But they didn't. And here, it only took Australia 20.1 overs to take what they were after all along. Through a mixture of determination, teamwork, and a dogged pursuit towards excellence, their successful pursuit of perfection took this team to a level that very few teams ever reach. And by the time Darren Lehmann hits the winning 4, this was proven. Australia were world champions for the first time since 1987, and back on top of the world cricket stage. The ethos and team spirit that was forged in this quest would pave the way for a golden era of Australian ODI cricket, with this victory being the first of 3 consecutive World Cup crowns over the next decade. As we look back on this, all these years later, although Australia doesn't have that same aura anymore, and other teams have definitely caught up, this serves as a reminder of what people can do when they face adversity. And that maybe, sometimes, losing at something, even back to back, can be the best thing you could ever ask for. Now, thanks for making it to the end of this video. If you liked it, please leave a thumbs up and share it with someone who you think might like it also. And if you're looking for another 6 and Out video to watch, check this one out. But until the next one, take care and I'll see you soon.